On today's show, are the Capitals done making moves and can we trust the kids?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about, can we trust the kids? And are the Capitals done making moves? Listen, going into the summer, going into free agency, there was a real feeling that Chris Patrick was going to go out and do something. And what he did was, well, very little. Is this Capitals team ready for the 25-26 season? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about who's still out there up front. There are UFA options. There is still time to bolster this team. I'll talk about that. After that, blue line options to cover up the gaps. We know that we've seen John Carlson injured before. We know that we've seen Marty Fehervary injured before. And if history is any lesson, you take a look at the playoffs last season, they reached for Aliaksei. Now, what options do the Capitals have? Do they need to address the blue line as well? But let's just dive into it. Are the Capitals done making moves? That's the question. I get that question, I would say, the most on YouTube and on Twitter. Dan, do you think the Capitals are done making moves? Now, traditionally, this is somewhat of the slower time of the summer. The GMs are trying to get their rest at their cottages or cabins, depending on where you live, and get ready for the season. Sometimes you see a bit of a flurry of activity right before the start of the season, and this is going to be an interesting season for the Capitals. It is also going to be an interesting season for Chris Patrick, who is sitting in the big boys chair now. We know that Brian McClellan was not afraid of going out and making big moves. Look at what he did a couple summers ago when he changed the lineup of this roster big time, and subsequently the Capitals were in a good position. This last summer, not so much. Declan Chisholm, Justin Sordiff, some depth players that ostensibly might play on the Capitals, but most likely play for the Hershey Bears. And, Anthony Beauvillier got an extension after they couldn't secure the Nikolai Ehlers deal. I still think that somewhere in Chris Patrick, there's got to be that part inside of him, because it's inside of me. And, we're both competitive men, I guess, at the end of the day. You think he wants to put his stamp on this team, that I went out there and I did something to make this team better. What has he done so far? I mean, the extension out there, he's made some big extensions to Jacob Chikrin, to Logan Thompson, but he didn't reel in the big fish that is going to fix what ails this team. Now, to be clear here, there's not a lot that I think that needs to be changed, but the Capitals are going into this season doing something that they haven't done in quite a long time. Is they are going into this season as is, if they started playing today, leaning into heavily with the youth. I'm talking Leonard, I'm talking Miro, I'm talking Andrew Crystal, and all unproven commodities on the big stage. I mean, right? We saw how Andrew Crystal knocked it out of the park with Spokane and in Kelowna, but we don't know what kind of player he's going to be like under the big lights in the NHL. Miroshnichenko has had a couple sips of coffee on the big team, but his play has never been sustainable. And like I say, Ryan Leonard, who joined the team in the latter part of the season into the playoffs there, one empty netter. So there are a lot of questions. And to just say, well, it's good enough, I don't know. I think that seems to me to be a bit short-sighted, that this could very well be Alex Ovechkin's last season in the NHL. If there's anything you think that they would do, you think that they would stockpile arms like you have never seen before to really give a good push to see if the Capitals could do something and win a Stanley Cup. Because like I talked about, injuries can change everything. Take a look at Alex Ovechkin. Last season, Jack McBain against the Utah hockey club, now the Mammoth, that there was the feeling of, not only is he not going to be able to catch and pass Gretzky, but what is that going to mean for the Capitals' big picture? As it turns out, they were able to weather the storm. This team is actually built well enough around Alex Ovechkin that they could win games. But then you saw the injury to Protas. That was a big You saw what happened to Marty Fehervary. And then if you take a look at the netminding position, what would it mean if Logan Thompson went down in the first handful of games? If it was just Charlie Lindgren and Clay Stevenson? Wow. I mean, if you want to talk about changing the trajectory of your team big time, and if you're a fan of the NFL, you should know this, that players are getting injured and teams that were favored to do great things, maybe not now. Maybe, they're going to have to reach out and try to get some players. I think the Capitals are in somewhat of a similar position. Now, if you are an everydayer of the show, I talked about that. I feel relatively comfortable with the Capitals going into next season, leaning into the youth, something that I think Capitals fans have wanted to see for quite some time. But understanding what that means, unproven commodities. These guys could not just shoot straight to the moon. Crystal, if he joins the team, could get off to a slow start. Miro, Leonard, any of these guys. And you didn't go out and address anything. And I think that how this is made true for me, or is exemplified, is taking a look at the lack of the moves that the Capitals made at the trade deadline. Right, that they didn't make any big moves. The only thing that they did was a little to nothing. Right, and now the Capitals are in the position they signed Anthony Beauvillier. Is the only thing they did. And you take a look at what they did at free agency. They didn't do a lot. Like I talked about, Anthony Beauvillier got that extension. This summer, Declan Chisholm got a deal, and Justin Sortoff, guys that, are kind of question marks. We don't know if they're going to fix what ails this team. And if you take a look at the teams that do things really well, they kind of have just options behind door number 1 and door number 2, and they have good options in their minor levels, AHL, ECHL, those kind of things. And to be clear here, the Capitals do have some good maybes, right? I think down in Hershey that could potentially fill in if called upon. But if you're asking me, I think the Capitals should, as I say that, go out and make some big moves before the start of the season. And in this episode, I am going to do just that. I am going to talk about unrestricted free agents that are available. Some of these are familiar names I've spoke about. Some of them are not familiar names. But I scanned over the list of players that are unrestricted free agents that maybe could help this team. Maybe not game changers on a night in, night out basis, but players that could step up if it really hit the fan, if you know what I mean. Because, you take a look at the Capitals, really good last year. In the last episode, I talked about, are the Capitals going to take a step forward? Are they going to take a step back? That a lot of the players put up career numbers, and sometimes that's not always sustainable. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of moves the Capitals make, and what kind of team is this going to be shot right out of the gate? A lot of questions, and I hope to answer some of those in this episode. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about who's still out there up front, forward options for the Capitals. I'll discuss straight ahead. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute ticket prices without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer it gets to first pitch. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. And listen, isn't that so true in life? You want to go see the Nats, you want to go see the Orioles, whatever baseball team out there, and you forgot about tickets. With Game Time, the tickets are actually cheaper close to first pitch, and you have panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're going to get when you buy the ticket. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about options. Again, it's a question I get quite often. Are the Capitals done making moves, and who's available anymore? That it seems to me that the players that were worth their salt probably were scooped up by other teams, but there are names available. Are they upgrades, or are they going to just stand in the way of the young talent on the team? Let's dive into that in segment number 2, talking about options up front and who kind of just pops off the page there. That's what we're going to talk about here in the second segment here. And I guess this is a name that I've spoke about this summer here already, but he's still available, and that is Jack Roslovic. And the Capitals have kicked the tires on Jack Roslovic before. And is it money? You know, is that what it's all about here? And do the Capitals believe that they have better internal options? The Caps fans saw him up close, of course, in the Carolina series. He scored in Game 3. That was his only goal of the playoffs. But he made his presence felt. He can skate, he can drive a line, and when he's versatile and can play center or wing. And that's one of the things I spoke about earlier this summer was the ability to play center and wing. And that's not that unique, I guess. A lot of the forwards can, but I think that he can do a pretty good job at center or wing. And why is that important for the Capitals? Well, of course, if you follow the team, you know that their biggest weakness was the third line, but more specifically, the third line center position. And we know Connor McMichael, I think it's the front runner, but what if he's not good enough and he just goes back to that second line left wing position? It would be good to have options. And, you know, you take a look at Jack Roslovic, still a younger-ish guy, 28 years old. He's not an old vet just hanging on. He's right in the middle of his prime window. But that's the hard part. The money's the hard part. And if he was as good as advertised, if he's as good as the sticker on the window on the car lot, then why has no one scooped him up? But the biggest thing, of course, is money. The Capitals don't have much wiggle room, just over $4 million in cap space. Roslovic made $2.8 million last year. He's probably not getting that again. And, you know, for these players, I think that their value goes down. The longer they're out on the market, you know, and Jack Roslovic is kind of a head scratcher for me. You know, take the Capitals out of the equation for just a moment here. You think that someone would have scooped him up already. I think that, you know, as we get closer to the start of the season, I don't think that he goes into next season not being on a team. I'm just saying that it's a bit interesting that he hasn't been scooped up yet. But what the Capitals need, they need that flexibility, a guy that can move around in the lineup to step in the spots on the lineup. Like I'm talking about, it could either be off the top of my head, like I say, the third line center. It could be third line wing. It could be a lot of the forward positions. And the good thing about Jack Roslovic is somewhat what you have. Again, you don't know what you have in Andrew Crystal. Really, you don't, because he hasn't been put through his paces in the NHL. You don't know what you have really in Ryan Leonard. So having a guy like that in the mix, I think would be a good thing. Another player to think about as well is Victor Olofsson. There has been quite a bit of chatter this summer by different media sources linking Victor Olofsson and the Capitals. He's not the player he was in Buffalo, and he popped 20 goals in back-to-back years. But with Vegas last year, he still put up 29 points in 56 games. Not too bad, right? I think that he would be a good fit, right? And what you have. The thing about him is that he's a bit streaky, which is a bit of a cause of concern, but he can shoot and he can give you offense in a pinch. But here's the kicker. His deal last year was just over $1 million. That's nothing in NHL money. So if they could land him, that's a pretty good deal. That's, professional tryout territory. That's take a flyer and see what happens. That I think that he would be worth the risk, if you want to call it a risk. I think that the Capitals are not adverse to doing that because, they're all in on Justin Sordiff, which is still a bit of a head scratcher. I mean, the numbers are okay. They're not great. So I think that the Capitals need, at least on paper, something that is a little bit more sure. You tell me, Caps fans, would you rather have a guy like Olofsson tucked away or hope that, an AHL call-up is going to fit the bill? I'm a guy that likes to play it safe. I would at least like to have Olofsson or that, ilk of a player in the fold in case injuries do arise. I talked about what it meant for the Capitals in the playoffs when Marty Fehervary was out of the mix. But imagine, say a fourth line, Dowd, Duhaime, one of these guys, say they missed a substantial amount of time. And, the fourth line plays a big role for the Capitals, as you know. It's just a line in name only that it's the fourth line because, well, you got to call it something. That oftentimes that is the line that generates the most. So it's an interesting thing there, but because we've seen this before, when you reach out down the depth chart and you think you know what you have, and you call the guy up from Hershey and suddenly playing bigger roles and all of a sudden doesn't quite live up to the expectation that you hoped for, then you're left scrambling, right? That you hope that you can call someone pick someone up off the waiver wire, make a trade, something of that nature. But it's not always a sure thing. And when you talk about Olofsson, he's a cheaper option, which is advantageous, as I spoke about earlier, that there's not a tremendous amount of cap room. And he's exactly the kind of mid-season injury insurance that can be a difference between surviving a series or folding. The Capitals don't want to do what they did last season. And you might be saying, well, what are you talking about? They won the Metro. They won the Eastern Conference. They made it to the second round of the playoffs. Dan, what are you talking about? I'm talking about that I think that they're setting the bar higher than that, that just making it to the playoffs is good. Making it to the second round is even better, but I think they have higher hopes. The above all end all is winning a Stanley Cup. The Capitals would like to do that in earnest, more specifically because this, like I said, very well could be Alex Ovechkin's last trip around the track, if you know what I mean. So I think that they would be wise, even removing Ovechkin and the significance of that mix is that you minus some players out of the mix, Radish, Mangiapane, Alexeyev, Ethan Bear, these kind of guys that, despite what they contributed or what they did contribute, I guess I'll talk more specifically here about Mangiapane and Radish. They were, at least in part, what got the Capitals to where they were last season. You're minus those two players that were in the lineup, a lion's share of the season. And now, right now, you're going to plug them in with some youth. For me, I would like to have some peace of mind in a guy like Olofsson or a guy like Jack Roslovic. Not guys that are going to, revolutionize the Capitals and just change them, but be that veteran leader that you have on the roster that you're pretty sure you know what you have. And if the wheel falls off, say a player gets injured or something like that, you're not left scrambling and you don't go into this deep funk of losing a bunch of games. I do think the Capitals need to address the forwards. I do think they also need to address the defense. And that's what I'll talk about after the break is the defense. Blue line options to cover the gaps. Straight ahead. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who love and live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. And listen, there is so much excitement surrounding the NFL season already, watching these preseason games, that it's an exciting thing to think about. And with FanDuel, well, they just make it that much more exciting. So visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we're talking about blue line options to cover up the gaps. And we know this is glaringly apparent that, the Capitals, like I said, Marty Fehervary got injured, and it was Aliaksei. And he wasn't the guy that I was hoping for. Probably you weren't hoping for. He played okay, like a guy that did get a lot of reps during the regular season. They had options. They had Ethan Bear. They had Dylan McElrath, but that is who they chose to go with. The Capitals do not want to go down that same road again. Okay, so it's minus Aliaksei. We know that he is now playing with the bitter rival Penguins in the Steel City. And who did they acquire? They acquired Declan Chisholm. Yeah, not the kind of name that you're like, yeah, that's the guy that's going to step in and fill the gap if it really hits the fan. So I think that the Capitals have a good loose sketch written in pencil with one of those fat erasers that you can erase and pencil someone else in, that I think the Capitals are in an okay position. However, if you look at the teams that do great things year after year after year, they're stockpiled with great options, and they're not afraid of making changes on the fly. So let's talk about the blue line, options on the blue line, and would these be better options than the options that they have internally? So let's dive into that in the final segment of the show, because like I talked about, that's the one thing, is the Caps got exposed the most last spring. When Fehervary went down, it wasn't just losing a player, it was losing stability. Matchups shifted. John Carlson had to take heavier loads. Aliaksei got thrown into spots he wasn't ready for. And the whole thing that worked so well throughout the regular season was put in the blender and kind of just put together on the fly. Did it function? Yes. Do I think the Capitals would have done better with Fehervary or, a guy that had more hours on his hockey odometer than Alex Aliaksei? Absolutely. So who's still out there that could give this team more security? Matt Grzelcyk is one name. Yes, he was with the Pens last year. And I get it. The Pens coming to Washington always feels weird, but it's happened. Orpik, Niskanen, off the top of my head, and Niskanen and Orpik were two amazing blue liners for the Capitals. Really added stability. That was one of the moves that I thought, wow, swinging for the fences. That I'm not adverse to it. And I know the Penguins aren't adverse to it because, well, Aliaksei is playing with the Penguins. But hear me out. Grzelcyk had his best offensive year, 1 goal, 39 assists, quarterback the power play at times, and even though his defensive numbers, weren't amazing, context in everything matters as well. He was playing with Karlsson, and the Penguins' goaltending didn't exactly bail anyone out. As you know, it was a dumpster fire in Pittsburgh at the net minding position. That's one of the things that they haven't addressed. There's always guys that they've pushed their chips in on, but they're never the guy. There's been great goalies. I mean, don't get me wrong, in Pittsburgh, Marc-Andre Fleury comes to mind, for example, but there's been instability, I guess is what I'm going to say there, for seasons after seasons. And the thing of it is, the guy, he moves the puck, again, experienced. I like experienced. He played in 66 playoff games. So when the Capitals do make it to the playoffs next season, and I'm really thinking that they're gonna, having a guy that has that experience is huge. Not maybe something that's easily quantifiable, but something that, if a guy that's played in the playoffs and done a pretty good job. I want a guy like that on my side. And tell me, would you rather have Grzelcyk in the playoff lineup or hope that, Dylan McElrath or Declan Chisholm is going to be the guy that can, play, let's say, 18 minutes a night? I would rather have a guy in the mix like Grzelcyk that we know has been there and done it before. And then another player here, and this player is a bit down the ladder here, is Jan Rutta. He's the opposite, not flashy, not a puck mover, but steady. I like that. Circle that, underline that. Veteran presence, underline that. Kills penalties, doesn't check all the boxes, but checks some of the boxes. And at this point, that's what we're looking for. Oh, and yeah, I forgot he's got 2 Stanley Cup rings. Cough, cough. So that matters. When you've been through deep playoffs runs before, you know how to handle the pressure. And I think that the Capitals, to a certain extent, got exposed in the playoffs. You saw guys that were, just on fire during the season, kind of nothing burgers in the postseason. Think Pierre-Luc Dubois, for example. Just off the top of my head, I know he wasn't the only one, but guys that were really good during the regular season, not so much in the playoffs. So that's why, a guy that has 2 Stanley Cup rings, knows how to win, how to handle those little moments that decide a series. No pressure, a lot of pressure. Neither of these guys is going to headline the offseason, right? So if they went out and signed either one of those players, it's not going to be like, wow, the Capitals did the thing and they're a whole lot better. But, you take a look at the moves that they made a couple summers ago, kind of flew under the radar, I guess I'm going to say, except for Chychrun. It was kind of a big deal, right? He's a name that still holds water. But, Matt Roy, a bigger name, but maybe not the sexy name that you were hoping for. Radish, Mangiapane, meh players. I guess, Roy's a little bit more than meh, but I guess I'm going to say that Mangiapane and Radish, didn't really just set the world ablaze. But that group together did really great things. So it doesn't need to be, the big, shiny, marquee, sexy name out there. It's the ones that have the experience, because this is a young team. Even if they do acquire one of the players that I talk about tonight, still going to be a younger team than we've seen before. And, Chris Patrick doesn't have to decide right now. He can bring a guy in on a professional tryout. I would be actually kind of surprised if they don't, because we have seen that before. Different players that get a kick at the can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I guess if recent memory, it generally doesn't pan out that well. But he can wait until November and sign one when injuries start piling up across the league, or he can trade midseason. Could, right? I think that he would be better off doing something right now. I would rather, because those guys are going to go wait. There could be different players available, right? They could trade, do something like that. But I would like to go into the 25-26 season with some security. And I want options A, or, what's behind door number 1 and door number 2. I don't want to, cross my fingers and toes and say, yeah, the Capitals are leaning into the youth and I think it's going to work. That's not how you run a professional hockey team. It just isn't. But he can't ignore the need. Chris Patrick can't. And, I think that there were some moves made, and I'm hoping that there's more. And this team isn't building for the future. They're building, to win now, or they should. They are built for the future as far as prospects are concerned. But I think that maybe they should be more invested in winning this next season. And I'm not here to say that they should deplete the prospect pools or anything. But what I'm saying is if this is in fact, all roads go through Ovechkin when you're with the Capitals. If this is in fact Ovi's last season, wouldn't you want to put together your best bet at winning a cup, right? I think that's what it's all about, and really give Ovi one more shot to do that. I think it's the little things. I don't think there's any glaring deficiencies on this team. But you definitely do need guys that are going to step up and step in if injuries or inconsistent play comes into focus. The Capitals are in a good position, but a lot of question marks is the theme of this episode. Leaning into the youth, a lot of question marks. Acquiring players this summer that, there's not real clear roads to, that guy's going to be a difference maker. I'm talking I'm talking Chisholm, guys that maybe are going to make this team better. I would like some stability with guys that I kind of know their track record of success. So adding one or two of these kind of players to the mix, I think could only help boost this team and put them in a good position for the 25-26 season. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.